So someone somewhere thought it was a good idea to make a show out of. And they weren't wrong. First off, don't worry, I'm going to keep this spoiler free. For now. I loved the original Castlevania show, but I couldn't help but feel a bit disappointed when it ended. Because all season 3 did was introduce a plethora of new characters and turn this small story into a big universe with a lot of characters, a lot of lore, and then naturally this gave you the impression that season 4 is going to expand everything even more. And yeah, season 4 was the final season. Why would anyone just spend 10 episodes building characters to use them for 10 more episodes? At least Netflix didn't cancel it. Then came Nocturne, which tells the story of Richter Belmont from Rondo of Blood. And as you might have guessed, the story has been tweaked greatly. Not that the games had any story to start with. The art style and the animations are top notch, never failing to capture the beauty of France, yet its grittiness being set in the French Revolution, without ever straying too far from the darkness of Castlevania. Fight scenes were everything I'd hoped for. They're overflowing with blood and gore, accompanied by stellar sound design that complements the clashing of swords and the crunchy sound of torn limbs. But the one aspect that made it shine so freaking bright for me is the fact that each and every character looked and felt totally different from one another in terms of combat. Richter relies heavily on his hunter whip and throwing knives. Meanwhile, Maria and her mother are both witches, but they still feel totally different from one another. Maria relies heavily on conjuration by spawning animals to fight for her. Meanwhile, her mother is, well, in RPG language, she's a destruction mage. Now that I think of it, each character feels like every run you've ever played in Skyrim. Not to mention the variety of foes they face, whether generic vampires that still feel different from one another too, or you see, there's something really interesting that even vampires have different fighting styles, although they're all vampires, but it's pretty interesting. And I haven't even mentioned the rest of the characters that they meet along the way, which still have even more different fighting skills. In terms of story, first seasons being first seasons, its main priority is not to offer a stellar story, but to introduce you to the characters who will later on take part in a stellar story, which is fine because they throw in just the right amount of combat, emotional story moments, and lighthearted jokes being thrown around. And speaking of introducing characters, the characters are very well written, although 8 episodes is not enough to get you emotionally attached to them, but I do see myself getting emotionally attached later on. Another aspect I really loved is the fact that Richter is nothing like Trevor. Trevor was a charismatic badass, always so confident. Richter, on the other hand, is far less confident, far less experienced, and way more human and relatable. However, the villain. I didn't see enough of her. So far, I see no motive other than blood, gore, thirst for blood, vampires being vampires. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So is Castlevania worth watching if you're not a fan of the game? Well, it is. It's a pretty good show, but I'll be honest with you, for longtime fans of the series, it will be far more enjoyable. There are always these tiny things they put in a modernized version of the soundtrack, or the utilization of combat moves that you used in the game without ever seeing Rector slide. Overall, it is pretty enjoyable if you're not a fan of the game, but it's going to be far more enjoyable if you are. What about the original show? The story is not tied directly to the original show, it's set literally generations after the original story. However, I think you would miss out on some details, which are, again, directed to those who watched the original show and will hit differently if you did watch it. So, as a recommendation, yes, do watch the original show. It's freaking good, come on, why would you want to miss it out? Not that it actually matters since literally no one watches my videos, but just to be safe in case someone decided to stick around, spoiler alert. Those who grew up with the game, like myself, were waiting for Alucard to show up. He did, it was freaking epic. But now, let's have a look at a small thing. So now we've got Richter, who happens to be losing, we've got Alucard, we've got Maria, and we've got Olrox. This is straight up Symphony of the Night stuff. Although they deviated heavily from the original story of the game, Alucard never met Richter this way. As a matter of fact, if my memory is not failing me, Richter never even met Olrox in the first place. Yeah, remember who else showed up in the game? I'm not saying they will appear, I'm saying it would be freaking stupid if they don't. I've got no idea how faithful will they remain to the original story of the game, but there's one aspect I'm hoping they wouldn't change, unlikely as it is. So in Symphony of the Night, Richter goes missing, and then later on Alucard finds out that he is the master of Dracula's castle. I would definitely love to see this in the show, however this means they'd have to sacrifice Richter, their protagonist. Doesn't sound much like Netflix, so it's pretty unlikely, although it's a shame. Nocturne does a wonderful job introducing us to a new Castlevania story story, which has the potential to surpass the original if they play their cards right. Which brings us to those who never play any cards. Both shows are successful, Metroid Dread was successful, now is the perfect time for a new Castlevania game, and I'm not talking about a Master Collection or a gacha mobile game. If anyone managed to make it this far, thank you for watching. For those who haven't, I hope life treats you the way Konami treats its games. Tell me in the comments what you think of Castlevania Nocturne, and until the next video.